Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Michelle Villagran. I'm the chair of the San Jose State University College of Professional and Global Education Academic EDI Committee. And we want to welcome you to, this is our final webinar for 2021 around EDI and social justice. So our presenters along this year have been presenting on topics, really diverse topics, and those that align with our goals of inclusive excellence, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you have questions during this session, you may place them in the chat. We'll be using chat for both Q&A and comments and anything you'd like to share. I'll be monitoring the chat, so any questions that come up will be taken towards the end. This is being recorded and will be available on the college YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment, and you can visit the EDI webinar series playlist where all of the recordings currently are from the past, and then this one will be there in a few weeks. I'm going to turn this over to and introduce our speakers for today. I'm very delighted that we have Raymond and Patrice Green with us, and they'll be speaking about engaging our communities through EDI work, our perspectives. So welcome, Ray, and welcome, Patrice.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Michelle Villagran, for this invitation, and all of you for being here. We're really excited to give a presentation on how we apply EDI work from our careers and to give you all different ideas, pathways to think about what it looks like, right, in practice, and how the work, this journey takes a lot of hard work, labor, and intentionality to get the values in our profession, in the work we do, in service to our communities. So first, I want to say thanks again for the invitation. We're really delighted to be here and for all of you to join us for this really delightful conversation. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And so first, I wanted to introduce ourselves a little bit more. So my name is Raymond, my pronouns are he and him, and I am the Education and Outreach Manager at the Hoover Institution Library and Archives at Stanford University. And I'm currently the president of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, known as APALA. And in addition, I am currently presenting in the unceded territory of the Ohlone Nation in the Bay Area. Patrice?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Well, good morning to a lot of you. I am Patrice Green. I'm the new curator for African American collections here at Penn State. I use she and her pronouns, and I am presenting to you all from the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock people.
Great, thanks. So I'd first like to highlight my experiences and thinking about EDI in the profession to give you an idea of what I've been doing for the past 15 years in my career, and to hopefully draw inspiration from the work that all of you are doing and to have a really great conversation about this kind of work. So first, I'd like to start off with this quote from author Maxine Hong Kingston, who says here, "In time of destruction, create something, a poem, a parade, a community, a school, a vow, a moral principle, one peaceful moment." Maxine Hong Kingston is a professor emeritus at UC Berkeley. And this quote, I think, really captures the essence of what is going on right now for all of us, what we're experiencing in terms of the collective trauma of COVID-19, the violence on communities of color, the rise of xenophobia, and all of these issues that are, whether they're state sanctioned or not, they do really make us reflect on what we're doing in the profession, how we're servicing our communities, how we are caring for ourselves, right? And what can we do to continue uplifting and ensuring that the values we place in equity, diversity, inclusion with intentionality is not necessarily a performative aspect, but rather something that it's authentic. We are building, creating, making something that is that transcends all these issues we're experiencing. Certainly, they are real, and we're all going through it in different ways. But I think they can be really uplifting, at least for me, from my experience over the past decade. And so I wanted to start off talking about how I celebrate diverse stories from today and in the past. And I'd like to talk about what I've done over the years. So I started my career at the New York Public Library. I'm from New York originally. As you could tell, the pace of how I talk. As you can see here, I was a student intern in the New York Public Library, this building, the Stephen A. Schwarzman building. And I started working in different roles, being a page, eventually being a library assistant, being a librarian, working on a variety of different areas. So in periodicals, in the Judaic Studies collection, as well as the General Research Division, and then public programming. And then, so as a result of my work growing within the New York Public Library, I became particularly interested in organizing public programs, particularly for a research library that is known for its extensive collections, worldwide renowned research services, and so forth. And so that really drew me into thinking more about EDI work. So I'd first like to tell you a little bit about this story here. One of the most proudest moment was co-organizing an event celebrating an Arab American author, Amin Rihani. So this was thinking about how we celebrate hidden stories at New York Public Library, The Book of Khalid by Amin Rihani. So Amin Rihani is really well-known, well-regarded as an Arab American author. This is one of his early works, the first book that came out from Arab American author that we have at the New York Public Library that not a lot of people knew about. And so it tells a story of two young men, Khalid and Shakib, who leave Lebanon for New York to seek opportunities in turn of the 20th century in New York. And together they face all these difficulties of what immigrants would experience, a story that we ourselves, maybe in our communities that we serve, may also experience. And so this event, to celebrate its 100th anniversary in October of 2011, so about 10 years ago, celebrated the book's centennial efforts. And so we had an original copy. We invited the Lebanese ambassador to the United States to speak, as well as prominent journalist Rami Khoury to talk about the book's impact and influence in Arab American literature and the immigrant experiences. And I add hidden here because many people have not heard of the story of Rihani, and it was the opportunity to really spotlight his work and life. And I think it was such a well-regarded event because we had like over 300 plus people coming in, and we really celebrated a story that really needed to shine through, especially tying into our collection, something that was not in the radars of administrators or in our colleagues. And so it was an opportunity to highlight and celebrate a story that may have just been passed by. Oh, there is the picture. And so in addition to that, I also want to share an example where telling stories include food programming. So in 2013 at the New York Public Library, I co-organized to celebrate an event for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month in May, a cookbook. We invited cookbook author Lauren Chun, whose new book at the time, the Kimchi Cookbook, which was based on her family's recipes and traditions in creating kimchi, a Korean dish of spicy fermented pickled cabbage. And we invited Ben Hao, an author, as an interviewer, and they discussed how to prepare kimchi in the library. So it was quite memorable because kimchi has a unique smell, and it's also a really great way to tell stories of one's experiences through food. And both of them told stories and the impact of food in their lives growing up. And so it became something of a pattern for me to start bringing in, inviting authors, particularly authors of color, communities of color, to talk about their stories in relations to the work they're doing and our collections. And also back in 2013, I was part of the inaugural team in participating in oral history projects, which was a great opportunity to learn more about our communities and sharing their stories. And we interviewed veterans to hear their experiences servicing in the Army and what it was like to be in combat, and hear how war, trauma, and loss deeply affected their lives in unimaginable ways. So telling our community stories can be a healing practice and process. And so I was thankful to be part of this project. And of course, last week was Veterans Day. And so it's timely that we recall the stories of our veterans and those who have served. And so going forward in my career, I've been fortunate to collaborate with other colleagues, now as an academic librarian, with teaching faculty and students to tell stories and experiences of those who have been underrepresented, for example, in Wikipedia. Whether they are women of color's experiences or the experiences from the Japanese American concentration camps in the 1940s, there are opportunities to organize events to recall and to ensure that these stories are shared. So one example was a Wikipedia edit-a-thon, which many of you might know. It's an opportunity where you bring in a community to improve, to edit, to add entries in Wikipedia because of its marginalization, right? There's not a lot of people of color, women of color, and other underrepresented groups in Wikipedia. And to add such stories and to tell them is a process. And so we incorporated exhibits, stories, and assignments into these workshops. This was held at Fresno State when I was a librarian there, focusing on social justice and equity within the entries and specifically tying into our work. And so back in 2017, the Special Collections at the Fresno State Library organized an exhibit, Japanese American, 9066, Japanese American Voices from the Inside, and tying it together through a Wikipedia activity that we were able to get community members to be involved and participate in sharing such stories that we have from our collections and exhibits. So this month, we are in November, and November is American Indian and Alaska Native Heritage Month. The Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, APALA, along with the American Indian Library Association, known as AILA, jointly sponsors this grant program called Talk Story to offer libraries an opportunity to organize public programs and workshops featuring storytellers. So I encourage you, if you're thinking about recruiting and having a program on Talk Story, sharing stories, sharing cultures in your libraries, to look into this grant-funded project and to apply for it. I think the deadline is coming around soon, and we could share more information on that shortly as well. So back in 2016, when I was an academic librarian at Fresno State, I was a recipient of such a grant, and we organized a family event program in partnership with the Cross-Cultural and Gender Center at Fresno State to host two storytellers from the Chukchansi Yokels tribe who shared their stories, languages, and engaged with attendees, as you can see here. We also hosted a traveling exhibit called Native Voices, Native People's Concepts of Health and Illness, which is, at the time, was supported by the Library Diversity Committee under Fresno State. And so this exhibit itself explores the interconnections of wellness, illness, and cultural life for Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians. So the stories drawn from both the past and the present examine the health for Native people is tied to the community, the land, and the spirit. So we had gotten this grant through APALA when I applied for it and tied it together with the exhibit as well. So I think all of these efforts you could see is culminating, it's collaborative. It certainly gives us the opportunity to engage with the community and with our colleagues internally. So in addition, I believe this connects to the work I have done early in my early career as a librarian. I've also worked as a ALA Emerging Leaders participant. And one of the projects was lifting voices of those who led our professions and associations. So in this project, we were tasked to work with the Chinese American Librarians Association, known as CALA, to lift up the voices of our prominent members, including here, Dr. Lois Mai Chan and Dr. Zicheng Li. What we did was we had oral history projects. We interviewed them and had conversations to learn more about their work. Unfortunately, both of them have passed, but their works and legacy remains critical in the field. And we're really particularly saddened to hear Dr. Zicheng Li passing recently, last year, because he was the founder of CALA and has done a lot of work to ensure that this association supports Chinese and Asian Americans at large. And with Dr. Lois Mai Chan, she was able to see the video. So there was a video on YouTube under the CALA channel. And right after that, subsequently, unfortunately, passed away. But her family was really thankful because of such a video that captures her work and legacy. And so both were pioneers in their respective areas. They gave so much to the profession and mentored so many students, junior colleagues. And as part of this ALA Emerging Leaders Project with 3 other group members, we really got a chance to interview them back in 2014 to tell their stories of success and struggles and to learn how they serve and what they see in the profession going forward. So as I mentioned, the Carla YouTube channel have both of the videos, and you can learn more about their work, their visions, and how we really draw inspiration from the work and continuing creating these opportunities for others to learn more about their stories. So now I am, as I mentioned, the president of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, APALA. So it's been a huge opportunity and honor to continue the amazing work we're doing, especially from so many leaders that come before me. Whether we're spotlighting new books through our literature awards or highlighting APALA members and their works, or the grant projects like Talk Story, or engaging with our communities through webinars. And being in solidarity with the other national associations of librarians of color is critical. So we have all these opportunities in fostering a stronger solidarity, engagement, and leadership development too. And one example includes this IMLS grant project that I am a co-project director of receiving. So we're really excited to announce that we have this exciting collaboration with Carla in obtaining this IMLS grant to support leadership development for Asian American and Pacific Islanders library workers. We aim to convene a national forum in January virtually to bring colleagues to share their stories of barriers and successes in leadership work, and how we foster and enrich leadership opportunities for AAPI library workers for the future. So stay tuned for more webinars, reportings, and so forth. And if you have applied, wishing you a best of luck as we're going through our application process right now. In addition, there are a lot of collaborations we have done together with APALA and Carla. One example includes last May's AAPI Heritage Month, which includes a Wikipedia Edit-a-thon event where we were creating, editing, collaborating, and ensuring that our stories are reflected in Wikipedia entries, focusing on Asian Pacific American Canadian library workers. And hopefully we'll do more of these collaborations down the line. But I wanted to highlight some of the activities that we have done together in addition to the grant project. So now I want to start closing in here. So over the years, in addition to the public programming and then the collaborations, I've also worked on different books and bringing in diverse stories into focus, and having focused on the experiences and stories of our colleagues advocating for EDI through different approaches, as you can see here. And so these are some of the books I have co-edited recently. And in the profession, whether it's through Wikipedia, telling and reflecting such stories for a global voice, to ethnic studies and academic and research libraries coming out later this month, or back in 2017, Asian American Librarians and Library Services. These are important publishing works that really collect and disseminate stories that are often not told in the dominant narrative. And I think it's something that I'm really grateful for having the opportunity to work with so many people over the years in telling these stories and sharing them in such publications. And finally, I wanted to highlight, as part of the theme of telling stories, we are uplifting and celebrating stories to build and affirm communities and their experiences, right? And so I have to say that we also need to ask ourselves these questions. Whose stories need to be told? Who's not in the picture? And when we think about the voices of equity in our work, it is really critical and important, whether it is doing public programming, creating a new service, and so forth. So let's continue telling such stories and to highlight representation and diversity in the work we do and in the profession at large. So thanks so much. And then I'll pass it over to Patrice.
Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you both for inviting me to be on this panel with you all today. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, Patrice.
Great. So my name is Patrice Green. I am the Curator for African American Collections here at Penn State, like I mentioned earlier, and I'm actually so excited about this job that it's embarrassing. But I wanted to tell a little bit about myself before we get started. So I am trained in public history as well as library and information science. They have a dual degree program at the University of South Carolina, which is where I went for grad school. And I was trying to, one, not pick because I'm not good at choosing, but also I wanted to find a way to kind of bring together the two worlds that I really enjoyed. So that's libraries and museums. And what do you know it? Special collections libraries existed. But I was unaware of that until I started grad school, which is something we need to address actually in LIS education, but that's another conversation for another day. So I got involved, and I'll be talking a little more about public history kind of and the way it relates to LIS and tackling entrenched narratives. So it may get a little chaotic, but that's okay. I promise it all has a point. But I got involved in this kind of public history angle or museums and historic preservation, those kind of worlds in high school, actually taking this elective called community studies. And one of our history teachers was taking us around to these different parts of my hometown of Roanoke, Alabama. I am not from New York. It's quite the opposite, actually. And we were kind of looking at all these different sites and wondering, how did this stuff get here? And at the time, I wasn't really seeing myself as like a historian or anything, so I didn't really think about the narratives that were going on. And we had a wonderful teacher who just passed away. Her name was Rhonda Baldwin, who would tell us all of these stories, and she's written books, and she was this wonderful person that taught us about all these kind of stories of Roanoke. On the opposite end of that was well, not opposite, but another local historian was a man by the name of Weiner Phillips. He also passed away recently. I think they were in the paper at the same time in the obituary section, actually. But also, I noticed that when he passed, in his obit, he was mentioned as a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. If you don't know what that is, it truly is the gift that keeps on giving for those of us who are trying to figure out how to get our narratives together and how to make ourselves, how to humanize, especially Black people in the United States, and especially in our history. So to continue Ray's kind of line of thinking of storytelling, what are we doing to challenge these entrenched narratives? Can you advance the slide, please? So one of the first things, I guess I could do that. Wait, never mind. So one of the first things is, I guess, being in the spaces, and I've participated in some internships and some other kind of opportunities like this one to be able to do that kind of thing. The first picture is just me at Museum Advocacy Day, and that's one of those days when we all go up on the Hill and we talk to our senators and our representatives about what we can do to kind of basically say, don't take our money away, or advocate for more funding for, museums and libraries. Shout out to IMLS, all of those things. In the middle, I was a junior fellow at the Library of Congress. And that was a great experience because it taught me a little bit more about reference librarianship, which I had been avoiding up until then, and now I love it. So that's me and my counterpart and Dr. Carla Hayden looking through some of the materials on our display day, just kind of seeing. And it was kind of great being in that space, but then I had to realize eventually that I needed to kind of decentralize or decenter the fact that it's the Library of Congress. It's great, it's wonderful, but also things are, narratives are not great there either. And then on the right-hand side, me and some of my former LIS students, student friends, we were kind of at this HBCU Library Alliance meeting, giving a panel on being new in librarianship. So being a new professional has been an adventure, but it's also been overwhelmingly white, which we know to be for the field of librarianship. So how do we get here? So this is a tweet from the current governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, and they call her Meemaw Ivey. It's ridiculous, and I love it, and I hate it. But it says we have permanently banned critical race theory in Alabama. We're focused on teaching our children how to read and write, not hate, which is hilarious as someone who has been through the public education system in the state of Alabama. And I wondered what that meant for libraries. School libraries and public libraries are really going through it right now, trying to deal with people and with legislators coming after them as far as the content or the books they can buy, that kind of thing. And at first, I didn't really think about it, but this is affecting people's lives on a policy perspective. So she has confused, of course, like a lot of people have, critical race theory, which is a whole other thing, from just general American history as an attack on white supremacy or white people or the right side or whatever, however you want to view that. So that's been a little bit kind of difficult to look into. And we're trying to get our narratives back, essentially. There's this kind of friction there where we're trying to take that narrative back, and then others aren't allowing us to, especially those in power. And it's causing a lot of hate. So what are entrenched narratives, and what does it mean to challenge them? So this is from my past life as a space camp counselor at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And these are kind of like some of the rockets that they have there. On the left is, it's a V2. It was one of the first, kind of upright launching rockets. And it was worked on and invented by Dr. Wernher von Braun, who is known as the father of modern rocketry. And then in the middle, you have Rocket Park, lots of life-size models of different rockets. That big one is the Saturn 1B. It sent up Apollo astronauts before we got to the Saturn V. It did kind of blow up though, or the space capsule. So they were like, we probably shouldn't use this one after that. And then on the right-hand side, you have the kind of commercial narrative. This company is called United Launch Alliance, and they're testing out new kind of equipment to send people in space for a long time so we can get to Mars. So within those three mini stories I just told, I mentioned nothing about the rocket scientists we brought over in Operation Paperclip, kind of a semi-famous story, I guess. Those people being actual literal Nazis. And that was the same way we were told to teach the students at space camp. You don't need to mention the Nazis. The Nazis didn't exist. Everything was fine. Everything was not fine. And we have this big narrative of this wonderful rocketry kind of legacy in Birmingham and in Huntsville and in all these different places in Alabama. But Alabama is very, very wrought with things like civil rights history. So it's like, it doesn't mesh well to tell those full stories. So when I think about the research that I did at the Space and Rocket Center for my thesis, it was kind of difficult to use search terms to find things, to find materials that would actually help me defend my argument. I think I need to speed up. So here are some of the kind of things that I've been thinking about as far as kind of relating not only libraries and archives, but also public history to why it's important for us to challenge entrenched narratives, why it's important for us to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't collect that, or we should collect this. Maybe we should update our finding aids. Maybe we should update the whole catalog. I know a lot of those conversations are going on right now as well. So I'll start with interpretation, preservation, and conservation. So, what are we keeping? Why are we keeping those things? Why are we collecting those things in the first place? And then archival representation, also a big topic. So which narratives do we prioritize? How do we find those things in the materials that we have? Do we hide them? Do we bury them? And then stewardship and storytelling. So who has the resources to kind of maintain those narratives? And in my current role, I steward the Bloxon collection. Charles Bloxon was, is a Black collector, professor, wonderful kind of book collector person. And he's just like, he has this magnificent collection upstairs, but it's not super accessible as far as being able to use it for research. So we're working on a plan to get that together. So interpretation, preservation, and conservation. I forget I put these title slides in there. I like them though. So this is one of those many places I've done an internship at. This is the Hampton Preston Mansion at Historic Columbia. Historic Columbia is in Columbia, South Carolina. And they have this like collection of historic houses, and they give tours and they do these reinterpretation projects. And the Hampton Preston Mansion several years ago underwent one of these reinterpretation projects. It is a site of urban slavery. So we think a lot about slavery as being on these big plantations, or even when we think about slavery in the North above the Mason-Dixon line, maybe a couple of people in a house. No, this mansion had like 80 people working at all times against their will. So And we had these different manifests and these lists of the things that people were supposed to be doing, things people ordered, using the different resources to kind of do the work to research Black people's lives within urban slavery. And being able to do this is very, very in-depth. So not only did they reinterpret it, there was a huge plan to be able to do that. You can't just decide with a historic house, oh, I want to do something different. You have to assign it a specific preservation treatment. We talk about rehabilitation. So rehabbing the property, making sure it's good to go, that and preservation, kind of restoration. So restoring the property to a specific time period. There was a little bit of that going on here. And then reconstruction, rebuilding something completely from scratch. You don't see a lot of that, but you know, it happens. It's not always people's favorite thing, especially if you don't have actual materials to look at. But using these kind of standards, we had this set of rules to go by to kind of update the space. And in that, we literally brought the stories of Black people out of the basements, which they were in. There were interpretive panels down there, into the rest of the house where they were literally working. So that was one of those things that we really had to think about. And also I noticed that's kind of a theme with a lot of historic houses. I don't know what that's all about, but that's something that people are actually working on now. And I'm glad to hear that. And then this one, I worked on the Matilda Evans house, not like worked on, but the National Register. So this is also in Columbia, South Carolina. I don't think it's part of historic Columbia, but Dr. Matilda Evans was one of the first Black female surgeons in the early Jim Crow years in South Carolina. So this property has state significance and statewide significance. And when I think about not only those Secretary of the Interior standards for preservation, I think about things like, well, what kind of sources are we using to conduct the research for this, like I mentioned earlier. So are we using Sanborn fire insurance maps? Are we using different materials? Are we using legal documents? How are we able to get the information that we need to preserve our own history? And that often is not available to Black and Indigenous people of color. And even if it is, it's hard to get to. And we don't always have a way to put it in a format or put it in a different kind of medium that makes sense to other people who are trying to, I guess, consume it. I don't like that word, trying to use that material to conduct their own research or just for enjoyment, for the memory and for the nostalgia. So we also, this was also something I was thinking of that I may write a little bit about later. A lot of people, especially in history departments and humanities, are like, well, why don't you just use your primary sources? Why don't you use this? Why don't you use that? That's very, very easy to say, but we're not always represented in archives the way we want to be, or in the ways we think we are. So we have to really think about archival silences, read between the lines, think about documents that are not there. Remember that for a long time, Black people in what became the United States literally were not legally allowed to read and write, to be literate, so that they could be controlled, right? So these are some of the things that we have to think about when we're saying, hey, go do this research, or when we send our students to the Special Collections Library or to an archive unprepared. So there are steps that we can take, not just on a library instruction role, but also from the professor's point of view or whatever teachers they have, whoever's instructing them, to say, hey, these are some of the things that you can expect, or this is how we read materials, or this is how we can do a better job of collecting materials. And that's where, of course, curators and archivists, all of us on the back end come in. So yes, I think this is an intro slide. Yes. So with archival representation, which I talked about a second ago, this takes place in many different forms. It's difficult to kind of reach people easily when we think about the magnitude of what archival collections and curatorial collections in general can offer us. So here is the Center for Civil Rights History and Research at the University of South Carolina. I was a grad assistant there. I have a few photos of some of the things that we kind of did to make our materials more accessible, but also to tell some stories that had kind of been like very obvious in the archives, but also very hidden So this is about reaching people of all audiences, where they are, and whether we're doing that physically or digitally. And of course, there's always pictures of me giving a tour and talking to people. I love the front end stuff. But in that middle photo there, we did this kiosk where we uploaded a digital version of this exhibit. This exhibit took up all 3 galleries, but not everybody has time for that or can come out there, or it's not very accessible. It's always terrible to get parking for places. And by the time you get to the library, people are just frustrated. So we have different materials uploaded into this kiosk that people can blow up if they want to, they can look at very closely. And it helps people if they're doing research, definitely, but it also just gives people an idea of the magnitude of the materials that we have. And on the right is one of the materials that I was helping to process. This is from the Dr. Willie Hereford papers. Dr. Hereford, well, the late Dr. Hereford now, was one of the first Black administrators at the University of South Carolina. And he was also the head, the founding head of the archives and library at the King Center in Atlanta. So his papers are wonderful. But before that, we looked through some of his materials, and there he is as, and I think this is at the Truman Library within the Truman administration after he finished being president, as one of the first Black people to be employed by the National Archives and Records Administration. So these are some of the materials that we kind of looked through and we're like, how can we bring these out so people can have a better idea of the materials that are actually in these collections. Okay, let me hurry a little. And then these are just screenshots of the online exhibit. So the exhibit was called Justice for All, and it came out of the idea that someone talking to the director of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research, Dr. Bobby Donaldson, they were like, there wasn't really much of a civil rights movement here in South Carolina, well, in Columbia anyway. He was like, wait, I know a lot of things, and he does. So he was able to go through, he and the team there, we're able to go through all these different collections and find all these stories. And they actually got a grant to digitize one of the biggest contributing collections to this exhibit. It's called the South Carolina Council on Human Relations Collection, and it's magnificent. But if you go through, it's kind of like a gallery view. It has a couple of discovery layers that you can kind of go in and see some of the materials that we were able to find. And these things, it would literally just be like a paper signed by Dr. Martin Luther King, but there was nowhere in the records that you could find it. There was nowhere that you could search for it. There was no way to know what was actually in there, even with the finding aid. And that's a problem that we're all going to run into when we're searching for materials and when we're creating finding aids and when we're creating catalog records. But that was one of the big things that we realized at the time. We were like, oh, we're sitting on like a gold mine here. There are a lot of things that people can actually come here to South Carolina to do research for. So that was a great discovery on their part. In a similar situation, I was an intern at the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian in their inaugural year. It was a lot of fun. It was great. And I encourage you, if you're out there, and when they started back up again, to apply for the Minority Awards Program. The stipend that year was like $6,000 for the summer. So it's like just enough, do some student housing somewhere. And we can talk about it later. But there was a project they were working on, this wonderful exhibit called Everyday Beauty. And it was just talking about Black people in leisure and in happiness and in joy. And just like not the richest people, but also like just enjoying their lives. And I went through and looked for copies and looked for different photos within that exhibit. And it was kind of nice to look at because I would not have seen it otherwise. I would not have it because we don't get a lot of narratives of Black joy during the civil rights movement. We get a little more into it when we get into the 60s and the 70s with the Black is Beautiful movement. But at that time, it's very much about saying Black people are struggling. And this exhibit was like, we don't have to always talk about Black people struggling. So I enjoyed working on that. So that narrative kind of flipped on its head a little bit about what Black people are going through at a given time. There's always space for joy, I think. So next slide. And then this one was something that I had started working on before I left the University of Georgia a couple of months ago. So these were community digitization kits. I know I was going to mess that up. So when we're thinking about community archives and archival processes, how we bring things in, this was one of those projects where I was just like, well, it's not always about bringing things in. And my department head at the time was very acceptable to that. It's not always about going into a community and extracting and taking. Sometimes it's literally about offering your support, which I'll get to in a second. So with this, it was literally just, putting together like a small kit. There was a flatbed scanner, there was a laptop with software on it, and I would go out to, or the idea was that I would go out to different organizations or community partners and say, hey, would you like to digitize or lightly digitize your stuff? Because the actual digi process is very, very, very much more complex than this. Give me just a second. A lot more complex than this. So I was able to start piloting the program with the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. And it was one of those things where I had to kind of remain humble. It was not about me. It was not about the Hargett Library at the University of Georgia. It was not about special collections in general. These church members wanted to scan and somehow, even if temporarily, digitize their obituaries, their programs from people's funerals. So they were able to do that, and they kind of modeled it after a similar program at the Auburn Avenue Library in Atlanta. So I would go to the church, to the actual church, and I would sit with them. And this was a historic Black church. So it felt very, even if I'm not that religious anymore, the cultural act of it was very, very familiar. They even gave me communion once. It was great. But being able to sit with them and fellowship with them and talk with them about why they think their history is important gave me a lot of perspective about what it means to consult, for one, but also what it means to get out of the way. Maybe offer some guidance, but remember and keep in mind that I am not the expert on their experiences. Yes, I am a Black woman. Yes, I went to a Black Baptist church, but that experience still is not a monolith, even if there are a lot of different things that we experience together. So my job here was to say, hey, maybe let's set up a naming convention. Let's do it this way so that when people type in this person's name or this family name or this date, they can find the material. And then I was able to think about kind of the history of that church and why they wanted to preserve it for future generations. And it was really an honor for me to be able to be there for them. The only other thing was going out of my way and saying, hey, I think I want to, help them actually scan the materials because it's not intuitive, right? And being willing to continue, being there for them and being on standby with any support that I had to offer. So the last thing I'll talk about, and I'll try to move real quick, is stewardship and storytelling. So again, this is about establishing and maintaining trust when we're thinking about disrupting these entrenched narratives and thinking about, America is not always the greatest thing in the world. So some of the things I've been considering, especially in this new role, is who gets to be a donor and who gets to be a collector. So who do we go to when we want people to donate things? It's people with money, people with literally old school cabinets of curiosity. You buy your really expensive things or your rare books or your artifacts and you sit them up in this space in your house and no one touches them, right? And then we go to those same people for their stuff and then their money. And I think about that as just yes, it's great to have stuff, but at the same time, and I hope my coworkers aren't super listening to this, I'm not always interested in collecting the stuff. And I think it's more important sometimes to, with the permission of the people that you're working with, collect their stories and their experiences. And then who gets to be a collector? Who gets to be a donor, right? Who gets to say, oh, I have something special to share, or I want to trust this institution to take care of my stuff. And as the person who is helping to take care of the stuff, it's kind of disrespectful, especially for college campuses, to say, hey, these people legally weren't allowed to be here, 50, 60 years ago, but now we want to do diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we want to parachute into the community, and we want to say, hey, can we take care of your stuff? Can we buy it from you? Can we take it from you? And here are a bunch of services that you didn't ask for, right? Because that's a lot of what we do in librarianship and in archives. So I think pulling back from that idea of it and saying and respecting people, especially people without money, people who have been marginalized historically, people who have literally been shooed off of property before, saying, hey, you also have a very, very important narrative that we actually value, which I'll get to in the next slide. And then again, thinking about how we are not the experts on their experiences. I can say all day that I am also a Black person who's lived in a small community. I'm thinking about Athens, Georgia right now, where I was right before this. But I can't speak to what they were going through in the 50s and 60s. I can ask my grandma, well, I can ask my grandparents or even my mom, but they're all different experiences. And then thinking about how we collect and how we're treating people that we collect from or that we want to collect from can be glaringly obvious when we go into a community and say, hey, you're a Black person. Come talk to us about Black people things. So this is not like the best thing that we kind of want to do. And on the right, that picture is just something from the Library of Congress. That's Teddy Roosevelt's journal. And that was the day his wife and child died. It's just an X and it says, the light has gone out of my life. And a lot of people know a lot about that story, but not a lot about Teddy Roosevelt being kind of the poster child for toxic masculinity. And I think this will be my last one. So these are some of the things that I think about when it comes to valuing those marginalized communities. You can read that on your own, but I think respecting the way people tell their stories and share their narratives is kind of the best thing that we can do. And being willing to be supportive and not always offer advice and say that we're the experts, I think is part of what we can do. I think that's all I'll say. I've run over my time, I'm so sorry, but we can go ahead with the Q&A.
Thank you both. This was so informative. I learned a lot, as well as have all these wonderful ideas to see what I can do with my students and as well as in our college to help lift up voices and really build and affirm and be in those spaces and to be supportive. If there are questions or comments, I saw some come in, but they went to only hosts and panelists. So I would like to just read those. And then if everyone can place them in the chat, make sure you choose everyone. Otherwise, attendees will not see your comments if you wish to share them with everyone. There's a thank you. Thank you for sharing this project, Patrice. We are a small community college library that could possibly get this off the ground for our minoritized community members and groups. And there's a hand clap there. Also, Patrice, a true public historian, thank you so much. Another comment, this has been the most thoughtful, interesting, and informative webinar. Thank you very much to such excellent presenters. And here's a question. How can libraries approach speakers of color from marginalized communities to offer library programming without tokenizing or otherwise not properly affirming?
Patrice, you want to go ahead? Go ahead first.
I was just going to say, respect people's expertise. I am not a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. I did notice on my CV the other day that that's most of the talking that I've done, actually. So, but I do not have formal training in that. If you ask me something, I'm actually like more of a 20th century historian or a reference librarian. Respecting people's area of expertise, I think, is where we can start. Asking people to do things outside of Black History Month is where we can start. And really just being kind of humble and saying, how can we support you? And again, rather than giving people like, hey, we're going to do, Black yoga in the park. Like, no, that's not always what we want to do. But when we do come up with like a new LibGuide or a new resource or something saying, hi, here's a thing. If you have any questions, we'd love to talk to you about it. Or if you have anything that we can do for you or explain some of the things that we actually do to people. I think there's a lot of kind of assumed things that a lot of assuming what people do and don't know about what libraries do, especially now now that we're really into the 21st century. There are a lot of people who obviously haven't been to the library for a long time. It's not necessarily their fault. So I think, just starting off with people's expertise, doing some knowledge management.
Yeah, building off of that, plus one, everything that Patrice said, pay them. I think that's the other thing, compensation, like for their expertise, and offering a stipend that is that they probably may not realize, but it's good. And also ask them what's their rate too, because and then compensate with that as well. So that's the practical aspect. I'll leave it there.
And there was a follow-up on the specific context is related to the opportunity to apply for a grant designed to increase cultural programming in our small rural community. One other thing I might mention too is looking at your collaborations and your partners. From a lot of the projects, Ray, both you and Patrice have done over the years, a lot of them have been collaborative, very collaborative with different partners, whether it's internal partners or external. So that also maybe in those collaborations, you can really elevate and support one another. And then whether it's through funding, other opportunities, but pulling in those partners and experts to be with you along the way. Other questions? I have 4 questions, but I'm going to only ask one. And this is, I think, one thing I've been thinking about with leadership and administration, and how can, for anybody on the call, maybe if you are a director, a dean, you're in an administration role or in a leadership role, how can our leadership really support these initiatives? Do you have any recommendations on what they can do to either back us if we have this idea, or if it's coming from, say, top down? That happens in a lot of organizations with hierarchy. But what recommendations do you have for administrators and our leadership to help support this very important efforts in this area? Or I can flip it and say, have you had any resistance in any of the projects you've done, and maybe some solutions?
Yeah, I could start off first. I think it kind of addresses to both of your questions there, and it's a good one, because the work that I think many times people are thinking about doing a project, it's often like there's a vision, but then comes the logistics. But from what I've experienced in the past, when you share an idea and then like a plan, but you don't necessarily have the partners, it kind of gets a little harder, right? To justify like who is it for, or getting that leverage with more partnerships to collaborate on these projects. I'm not to say that it validates, but it really helps. From my experience, if you have more partners, more buy-in, whether there are other colleagues working with you or with another organization, and then there's some sort of a more thoughtful process. Sometimes a lot of people have an idea and then they throw it out and then they give it to somebody else to implement or execute. And I think that's often one that gets kind of fuzzy, and then it never really gets executed with intention there, because it's like someone else want someone else to carry forward this idea for some reason. But I think for administrators, how they may want to think about supporting these efforts, it really comes down to looking at their budgets and prioritizing what is done, right? And from what I've sensed and experienced, a lot of times administrators would do it if they are being squeezed either from the people above them or lateral. So it's sort of like coming in from different pressures. So it's sort of like looking at it from how they then prioritize, because other people are prioritizing this above their pay grade. So I kind of leave it at that as I'm thinking through that question. But maybe Patrice, you have some reactions or thoughts?
No, I was just going to say, it's me with the big visions. My former kind of administrators were really good about managing my expectations and making me prioritize things. And the community digitization kits, for example, was something that they thought of. Actually, it was more of a top-down thing. So I was just like, all right. And I kind of took it, and it became this big thing in my brain to the point where I was frozen in time. I was just like, oh no, how do I actually do this? And it was one of those things where I was just like, okay, I'm going to really have to get out of my silo on this one. And I worked with a consultant to actually think about some actual step-by-steps things we could do. And I'm always like a person that's like, let's write a standard operating procedure. I'm so sorry, I'm the worst. It's great, I love it. But yes, having administrators believe you and back you up is one of the best things that you can do. And I'm glad to have had that. And then going back to not being in silos and being collaborative, I think that's honestly the only way you get things done. One of the best things about my current role is that I get to work with the Center for Black Digital Research here at Penn State, with the wonderful Dr. Shirley Moody Turner, with Dr. Gabriel Foreman, with all these wonderful people, these big names who are doing these wonderful digital projects, but they're digital projects. You know what gets out of hand real fast? Digital projects. So it's one of those things where it's about thinking about, again, budget, what your capacity is, and then really thinking about who do you want to prioritize at this time? Do we need another exhibit about this old white lady? Maybe not. Maybe we could throw some money into revitalizing an old project or bringing in some new collaborators who can really help move our organization forward.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I see another question that came in, and I think this may be our last question. If there's a burning question, add it in, but let's see if we can get this one addressed. I often feel like a token at my current job. What strategies or advice do you have to push back or at least survive until the next opportunity, if that makes sense?
Yeah, first I want to say I'm so sorry you're experiencing that, and thank you for sharing that, because it affirms, because I've experienced it, and I'm sure many of us have experienced it, and so yeah, we're really sorry that you're experiencing that. One strategy that I have heard and learned over the years is to document the interactions, the activities, what was said, and of course it's sort of, you know, you're keeping track of what's being said, and so then you have evidence, you have date, time, you have specific examples, and that's something that then you would use to talk to people in your human resources or your supervisor to really bring that to light. That's something I would just offer, and I know Patrice or Michelle might have other thoughts on that too.
Yeah, for me, it was a lot more about finding community than trying to push back against the pushback, because so often I'm working on not being this person anymore, but the only Black person in a space or the only person of color in a space. And it's just like, it's obvious, and you don't think about how it affects your psyche until you're just like, this is terrible. Am I losing my mind? And you question yourself and you doubt yourself a lot. So again, I'm also very sorry that you're going through that, but finding people outside of your department, making sure you have a life outside of work, these are things you've heard a million times. But for me, I started focusing on skills, because when it comes to pushback, I don't really use my energy that way. I will say, don't even worry about it in a minute, like so fast. And it's just like, don't even worry about it. And I just kind of move on. And that's not the best way to really solve things. But if you're trying to get yourself together, trying to do what you can in that specific role, just make sure you're there to do your job and then you leave. That's difficult, but it's doable.
And I'll just add, I agree with both what Patrice and Ray have said. I think too, it goes to having your support networks, which Patrice talked about. I really think if you have those networks, even outside of your organization, have that space, and what gives you that joy outside of, your role. We spend a lot of time in the workplace, so it's important to have that space and that time for your own well-being. So taking care of yourself, I think, too, is a priority. And I would say, it might be time to leave. Honestly, there's a lot of toxic organizations, and it's not sometimes worth it to fight the fight, and go somewhere else where you'll be valued and appreciated and not tokenized. And my heart goes out to you for what you're going through. I think we're going to wrap it up. There's a lot of thank yous. Thank yous. Always room for joy. I think that's a great, Patrice mentioned that in her talk about joy when we're looking at narrative stories, but also our own joy, right? So thank you, everyone. A big thank you to Ray, Patrice. I appreciate both of you for joining us today, sharing your experiences, and also to all of our attendees for taking the time out of your day to listen to this today or later on. And you have their contact information. So if there's follow-up questions, you can reach out. Any concluding remarks, Patrice or Ray?
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.